Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here today to cut through all the noise and really focus on the critical insights from global markets, economics, and world affairs.
That's the plan. And right at the top, a huge thank you to stocktelescope.com.
Oh, absolutely. The source material they provided for today is just incredibly rich, very current. It's given us a fantastic base for this exploration.
Yeah, a real treasure trove. So our mission today for this deep dive into the global market and economic highlights, June 24, 2025, is, well, it's to get beyond just the headlines.
Exactly.
We've pulled together insights from a whole range of sources, Reuters, CNBC, the Wall Street Journal.
CNN, the New York Times, BBC, even the Boston Herald, a really diverse mix.
Right, and the goal is simple.
We want you to walk away with a solid but, concise understanding of the key events shaping things right now, without feeling totally overwhelmed.
Just those key aha moments.
Precisely. So let's start with the market itself. What were the immediate signals telling us today, June 24th?
Well, on the surface, things looked positive. The S&P 500, it closed up almost a full percent, 0.96%.
Okay, building on pre-market gains then.
Yeah, exactly. And the Nasdaq, also up 0.94%. The Dow finished up 0.89%.
So a generally positive day on the indices.
Right. But, that positive surface hides a lot of interesting, more complex shifts underneath once you start digging in.
And let's do that. Let's dig into some of those big corporate moves.
Yeah.
First up, a pretty major split, Novo Nordisk and Hims & Hers. What happened there?
Yeah, this one's quite impactful. Novo Nordisk, the maker of Wegovy, they've ended their partnership with Hims & Hers.
Why? What was the reason given?
They cited unlawful compounding and deceptive marketing.
Unlawful compounding. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. It basically means Hims & Hers was allegedly mixing or altering medications without the proper authorization, which, in the pharma world, that's a huge red flag. It hits directly at drug safety efficacy.
And the market noticed, I assume.
Oh, definitely. Hims & Hers stock just tanked, down 32%.
Wow.
And it's more than just a stock drop. It sends a real warning shot across the whole weight loss drug market. Regulatory compliance isn't optional.
It's foundational.
Exactly. Cutting corners, well, it can destroy partnerships and trust pretty quickly, no matter how hot the market is.
Okay, so from a breakup to a buildup, Amazon, CNBC reports a massive investment in the UK, $40 billion. That's about $54 billion US dollars.
Yeah, over the next 3 years, this isn't just tinkering around the edges.
No kidding. What's the plan?
Well, it shows a really deep commitment to the UK market. They're building 4 new fulfillment centers, upgrading existing ones, creating thousands of jobs.
So logistics mainly.
Mostly, but
Yeah.
not just that. It also expands their data infrastructure, even their film production side. So they're really deepening their footprint strategically.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk autonomous driving. Some progress, but maybe some bumps too. Reuters reported Uber and Waymo launching in Atlanta.
That's right. Autonomous ride-hailing, starting with a fleet of Jaguar I-Paces. They plan to expand. It feels like a definite step forward.
But there's a counterpoint, isn't there, with Tesla?
Yeah, exactly. It sort of highlights the tension in this space. CNBC noted Tesla's Robotaxi pilot launched in Austin. Stock initially jumped, I think, 8%.
Right.
But almost immediately, the NHTSA, that's the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, started looking into safety concerns.
Why? What triggered that?
Videos surfaced showing some, let's say, erratic driving from the robotaxis. So you have this duality, rapid progress on one hand, and very real, very critical safety questions on the other. It's kind of the story of AVs right now.
Yeah, that seems to capture it well. Okay, Supermicro, SMCI. Their stock took a hit, down about 10%. Why?
They announced a $2 billion convertible debt offering.
Ah, convertible debt. Can you explain quickly what that means for investors?
Sure. It's a type of bond that can later be converted into company stock. So when that conversion happens, you get more shares out there in the market.
Which can dilute the value for existing shareholders.
Exactly. That's the concern that drove the stock down. It's a common way to raise money, but dilution is always a risk investors watch.
We should add some context, though, right? SMCI's year hasn't been all bad.
Oh, definitely not. Context is key here. Despite this drop, the stock is still up, around 40% year to date, driven by huge demand for their AI servers.
And that big Saudi contract.
Right. So the underlying business, fueled by AI, looks really strong, even with this financing move.
Okay. Now, speaking of concerns, Boeing. Still under the microscope.
Yeah.
CNN says the NTSB findings on that 737 MAX door plug incident from 2024 are due out today.
Yeah, the findings are imminent. And it's widely expected they'll likely reinforce the ongoing worries about Boeing's safety culture and production quality.
Another critical moment for them.
It really is. This narrative just keeps recurring, unfortunately, for them.
All right, let's shift to Ford and their EV plans. The Wall Street Journal highlighted ongoing struggles with rare earth magnet shortages, even with the U.S.-China deal.
Yeah, this is fascinating because it really exposes that geopolitical vulnerability in supply chains. The deal exists, but getting enough export licenses approved is still a bottleneck.
And China's role here is dominant.
Hugely dominant. They control something like 90% of the global supply for these critical magnets. It just shows how international relations can directly stall innovation, even for a giant like Ford.
Yet, despite that challenge, Ford's moving forward with a big project. The New York Times reported on their Michigan EV battery plant.
They're proceeding with the $3 billion plant. And this is even acknowledging a risk of, quote, very material financial impact if potential GOP-backed tax credit cuts happen.
That's a bold move.
It really is. It signals a very strong long-term bet on EVs. They're aiming for 1,700 jobs, production starting in 2026. Seems like they see the strategic goal outweighing the current political uncertainty.
Betting on the future. Okay, advertising world now. A massive merger got the FTC's okay. Omnicom and Interpublic Group.
Yes, the Wall Street Journal covered this. Omnicom's $13 billion all-stock acquisition of Interpublic. It creates this enormous $25 billion ad giant.
But there was a condition attached. A somewhat unusual one.
Very unusual, yeah. The approval hinges on pledges from both companies not to engage in politically driven ad boycotts.
Interesting.
Final approval needs a public comment period, but that condition itself is pretty significant. It shows maybe growing scrutiny on the power these ad giants wield, trying to stop them from, weaponizing ad spend politically.
Right. Okay, over to real estate tech. A lawsuit brewing. Compass versus Zillow.
Yeah, the Boston Herald reported Compass filed an antitrust suit against Zillow. It's about Zillow's ban on private listings.
And Compass says this hurts competition.
They argue it stifles competition and limits choices for homeowners. They're seeking damages and want the policy stopped, so it's a direct challenge to Zillow's market practices.
We'll watch that one. Now, turning overseas, Nissan seems to be in deep trouble. Reuters reported on their shareholder meeting.
Yeah, shareholders were not happy. Lots of criticism over deepening financial losses, about $4.5 billion plus job cuts, and they suspended the dividend too.
Ouch.
Yeah.
What's the turnaround plan?
Well, CEO Ivan Espinosa talked about closing 7 plants, cutting 20,000 jobs. It's a pretty drastic restructuring plan.
Sounds painful, but maybe necessary given the competitive market.
That seems to be the calculation, yeah. A major recalibration.
And Starbucks in China. There were rumors of an exit.
CNBC clarified that. Starbucks denies a full exit, but they did acknowledge they're exploring options. That could include selling a stake in the China unit.
What's driving that exploration?
Intense price competition, mainly. It's really fascinating. Their market share in China has just plummeted from 34% in 2019 down to only 14% in 2024.
Wow, that's a dramatic drop.
It really shows how fast things can change, even for a huge global brand, when local players get aggressive on price and consumer preferences shift.
Absolutely. Okay, one more on the tech finance front. Blockchain going mainstream. Digital asset raised a lot of money.
Yeah, $135 million, according to CNBC. And look who's investing. Goldman Sachs, Citadel, major Wall Street players.
What's the money for?
Expanding something called the Canton Network. Its purpose is institutional asset tokenization.
So using blockchain for traditional assets.
Exactly. This isn't just about crypto anymore. It's about using that underlying tech-distributed ledgers for things like trading and settling traditional assets more efficiently within the regulated financial system. It's Wall Street adopting the infrastructure.
A significant step towards integration.
Definitely feels like it.
Okay, great overview of the corporate side. Let's widen the lens now to the broader economy. Oil prices took a dive.
Yeah, quite a significant drop. Reuters reported both U.S. and Brent crude fell about 7% on Monday.
What caused that?
Mostly easing fears about the situation in the Middle East. Talk of a potential ceasefire reduced worries about supply disruptions through key shipping routes.
Geopolitics driving commodities again.
Classic example.
And Fed Chair Powell had something to say about interest rates.
He did. CNBC reported he basically said the Fed is holding rates steady for now. They want to see how Trump's new tariffs might impact inflation.
So a wait-and-see approach on tariffs.
Seems so. He emphasized the Fed's commitment to price stability and full employment, despite recent criticism, just cautious balancing act.
What about the U.S. housing market? Any updates there?
Yeah, existing home sales for May actually ticked up slightly, 0.8%, just a hair above expectations.
And prices.
Still climbing. Median sale price hit a new record, $422,800. That's up 1.3% from last year.
But there's more to the story, right? It's not all straightforward.
Not at all. You have to look at the nuances. Inventory, for example, is actually up quite a bit over 20% from a year ago, which you'd think helps buyers. But homes are taking longer to sell, and mortgage rates are still pretty high, so it's complex. Demand seems strong, but affordability and how quickly things move are real challenges.
Got it. And gold prices, usually a safe haven?
They dipped. Fell over 1% to a two-week low, down to around $3,326 an ounce.
Why the drop?
Same reason oil fell, basically. The potential Israel-Iran ceasefire reduced that safe haven demand, less perceived risk, less rush into gold.
Makes sense. Okay, let's shift again this time to global affairs and some key policy changes. This is where things often connect back to the markets we just talked about.
Absolutely. It's all interconnected.
Starting in the Middle East, CNBC reported an Iranian missile strike on a U.S. airbase in Qatar.
Yes, the Al Udeid Air Base. It was framed as retaliation for recent U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. Happened Monday.
Were there casualties?
Interestingly, Qatar reported none. They said the missiles were successfully intercepted. It kind of highlights the advanced defense tech in play, but also the constant tension.
And that ceasefire between Israel and Iran sounds shaky.
Extremely volatile, yeah. Both the Wall Street Journal and BBC reported on this. President Trump announced it, but almost immediately, both sides started accusing each other of violations.
So not holding.
Doesn't look like it. Israel threatened to respond with force to new attacks. Iran claimed Israel launched airstrikes right after the truce was supposed to start. Deep distrust there, making any calm hard to sustain.
Definitely keeping the world on edge.
Yeah.
Okay, back in the U.S., a big move in energy policy in New York.
Yeah, this is quite significant. The Wall Street Journal detailed plans for the first major new U.S. nuclear power plant in over 15 years.
Really? Who's pushing this?
Governor Hochul directed the state utility to add at least 1 gigawatt of nuclear capacity. It feels like a real potential shift back towards nuclear as a clean energy source.
Which has faced a lot of headwinds in the U.S. for decades.
Exactly. Safety concerns, costs. This is a long-term play for New York. We'll see if other states take notice.
On immigration policy, the Supreme Court weighed in.
They did. Sources like the Journal and BBC reported the court is allowing the Trump administration to resume deporting migrants to third countries without prior notice.
What does that mean exactly?
It pauses a lower court ruling that required more due process before those deportations. The conservative majority backed the decision, while the liberal justices dissented. Shows the deep divisions on immigration policy.
Okay. And consumer protection. Some concerning numbers reported by Reuters.
Yeah, consumer groups put out an estimate that the rollbacks of CFPB rules under Trump have cost Americans at least $18 billion.
$18 billion.
How? Mostly through higher fees and lost redress, meaning money people couldn't recover. They pointed to dropped cases against major banks, and the CFPB, for listeners, that's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, their job is financial fairness.
So the argument is less oversight led to direct costs for consumers.
That's the claim from these groups, yes. Raises big questions about regulation's impact.
Now, something that affects almost everyone. Credit scores. FICO is changing things.
Big change coming. CNN reported FICO plans to include buy now, pay later BNPL loan data in new credit score models launching later this year.
How significant is that?
It's pretty fundamental. It means those small, often informal-seeming BNPL loans will now directly impact your main credit score.
Good or bad?
Could be both, you know?
Yeah.
Might help people with thin credit files build a score. But it also means missing even a small BNPL payment could hurt your ability to get a mortgage or a car loan down the line. It formalizes BNPL's impact.
Something for people to be aware of. And finally, on the policy front, environmental rules. The roadless rule.
Yes. The New York Times reported the Trump administration is repealing the 2001 roadless rule.
What did that rule protect?
It shielded about 58 million acres of national forest land from most road construction, logging, and development.
And repealing it means?
It means those areas are now potentially open for that kind of commercial activity. It brings back that long-standing debate. Economic development versus environmental preservation.
A major policy shift. Okay, just before we wrap up, a quick look at the calendar and recent earnings.
Sure. This week's pretty packed economically. We've got Fed Chair Powell testifying today and tomorrow, durable goods orders on Thursday, and then Friday, the big one, the core PCE price index.
The Fed's preferred inflation measure.
Exactly. On earnings, things looked good for TDSYNX and KB Home recently. Both beat expectations.
Any IPOs to watch?
Happy City Holdings Limited is confirmed for today. And later this week, estimates point towards Candle M Venture Limited and Jefferson Capital, Inc. possibly listing.
Okay, good to know. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive.
Quite a journey through today's landscape.
It really was. From corporate deals and supply chains, global conflicts, policy shifts, we've covered a lot of ground. And hopefully, you listening feel like you've quickly grasped some really critical information shaping our world.
It's all about connecting those dots.
Absolutely. And maybe that leads us to a final thought.
Yeah.
We've seen today how things that seem separate, like a shortage of rare earth magnets or a missile strike far away, are actually deeply interconnected.
Mm.
They shape markets, yes, but also our daily lives, our future prospects.
Mm.
So, the question to ponder is, what does this deep interconnectedness really tell us about how we should prepare for tomorrow?
That's a great question to leave folks with.
And it's why we do this. If you found this valuable, please subscribe to The Deep Dive wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget to also check out and subscribe to the Market Pulse podcast for those ongoing updates that fit right alongside these deeper explorations.
Couldn't have said it better. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.
We wish you well until the next one.